All people of Scripture hear the continual story of living, death, resurrection in the New Testament, or in the Hebrew Scriptures as we hear today, destruction of the temple, and then the rebuilding of the temple that will come later. In all things, our human industry kind of makes a mess of things, and then God, in His great mercy, restores them. Today we hear how the kingdom of Israel, the kingdom of Judah are destroyed, and the Babylonians come in because of the way they had been running things so poorly, and the people kind of lost their way. The Babylonians came in and forced all the top tier of folks in Israel, the ruling party, the priests, all into exile in Babylon. The city was destroyed and burned. Yet we hear in the gospel the story of healing and Jesus' intervention. And so in two different ways we hear about how big things fall apart and come back together like peoples and nations, and then how individuals go from sickness to healing. Such is the story of our lives. In the darkness, we always trust that God will come through, light will come again. And while we can talk about how governments and people lose their ways and fall into destruction, I'd rather focus on the second. Because here Jesus is physically touching someone else to convey healing, something that we know is so important in the healing process, yet how much we are not able to do that right now, and how it pains us. Even to give a hug in a time of grief and mourning can be so restorative. But Jesus does, if we look at this reading moreover as a metaphor, that Jesus chooses to touch us, that God elects to be with His people in the midst of suffering and despair, and to heal. Doesn't always mean physical healing, as we know, as we ask for prayers for healing, whoever it might be, but we know and hear how Jesus chooses us, touches us from afar in the heavens, if you will, right now, bringing us to life. This comes to mind because we Paulists are still feeling the loss of our brother, Father Rich Colgan, who died about a month ago now of COVID. And we all prayed, as anybody would, that Jesus would touch him and heal him and bring him back to life, bring him out of that ventilator at the Washington Hospital Center. That did not happen. Yet we Paulists have been so touched by all of those who have extended their prayers and their support, and sending us missives of how Rich's life had touched them in the past, reminding us that Jesus is at work. And today, matter of fact, I got this sympathy card from parishioners who knew Father Rich when he was at the University of Minnesota. They wrote this great story about Rich. Steve writes, "He had a positive impact on my life. I saw him as my spiritual mentor in Minnesota. He helped me in my relationship with my future wife. Father Rich moved to Boston then, and my wife was from Boston. It was after a visit with Rich and a mass he celebrated that I was inspired to propose to her. She said yes, and the rest is history. We continued to visit Rich in Boston until he moved. He was a great man." When you're in the midst of grief and you're in the midst of wondering what it's all about, God always will send you something to remind you of His healing touch for those who grieve. And to hearing what it is, that was the really healing thing in Father Rich's death. The fact that he loved so generously, he taught others to love, and he knew he was loved before he passed away. That is true healing, to know you are loved by your God and by those around you, and that you were able to give love in return. As we come to this Eucharist today, may we know of Christ's love for us, who, while he may have been distant over the last number of months, still wishes to walk with us, feed us, and nurture us in any number of ways. All of those we can see as Eucharistic.